Let me just, there we go. Excellent. Okay, so thanks very much for coming along today. My name's Tim Klabdor. I'm a manager of educational design at the University of Adelaide. So for those of you who are not 100% sure where that is, I'm speaking to you today on the lands of the Kaurna people, which are the traditional custodians of the land that Adelaide actually sits on. So I just want to acknowledge those traditional owners, their deep connection to this beautiful country, and pay respects to their elders past, present, and emerging. So Adelaide is kind of a little bit interesting because it's most of Australia's population lives on that east coast. We're a little bit around from that. It's about a 10-hour drive to Canberra, probably a little bit longer, and about 8 hours to Melbourne. So we are kind of remote on our own, but at the same time, we're a little hidden gem. It's famous for our wine making. So we've got three world-class kind of wine areas just outside the city. We're pretty well known for our festivals. They just all tend to sit in March for some reason, but it is when it's beautiful weather here, and also famous for racing. So the Tour Down Under and quite a few other races on wheels happen in this place. So, sorry, let me get back onto this. There we go. Oops. So for the past 6 years in Adelaide, I've been leading a learning design team. And one of the things that we've been working on is developing up a shared set of practices and ways of working. And a large part of my role has been to actually establish the capability within our organization to develop quality online courses. And it's through this work that this idea of a design system really started to emerge. So design systems are pretty common in web and graphic design, but not necessarily in other design disciplines. My background's in graphic and web design, so I've been aware of these systems and tools for quite some time. And they usually consist of the brand guidelines, the colors and fonts and visual elements that a company might want to use across their products. So when I was working with my team and trying to develop a shared set of practices, I thought maybe there's something in this that we could leverage and adapt to our work in terms of learning design and move it into this space. So the key features of a learning design is that it's a set of standards to manage and scale design practices. It includes reusable components, design principles and guidelines, and essentially it's there to help achieve consistency and efficiency. So I kind of liked that little definition, helps kind of wrap it up into a nice little succinct thing. So what are some of the benefits of working with a design system? Well, one of the big ones is around efficiency. So a design approach creates more efficiencies by reducing decisions and the work that's involved in making them. If you've worked on a large project, you know how time-consuming it can be to get decisions made, getting meetings together and emails and research and discussions that are required. So a design system is essentially, instead of approaching each one of those decisions on a one-off basis, you create repeatable solutions to common design problems. So a systems approach to design reduces the number of decisions people need to make, and this creates more consistent results as well, because they're not reinventing the wheel every time we need to make the same kinds of decisions. A design system helps to create collaboration by one of the key features of it is that it creates this kind of lingua franca, a shared language and vocabulary for which the team can actually start to talk to. And this reduces misunderstandings, talking past each other. When we can actually speak the same language and be on the same page, we can actually collaborate more effectively. And especially this is the kind of thing you want when you're working with a team. There's also this idea of scalability. So design systems embed the building blocks of design into teams and workflows to help create consistent experiences. Even when a design is distributed among numerous people and other team members, which might include academics and course authors, media production, and people building stuff in the LMS, all those kinds of things, a shared language and shared set of components means that designs can pretty quickly be developed by those without a huge amount of experiences. If you know what things look like, then you can kind of get through it fairly quickly. So it actually helps by empowering the team involved. We can scale the resourcing that we've got, therefore, to things that are actually more important and more valuable when it comes to the actual design. Oops, sorry. One of the things is once you've got scalability, once you've got components, then you can actually start to count them and how often they're getting used. And then you can assess their contribution to the overall experience. So being able to actually see what's happening within courses allows you to start to seek out, well, what's some of the issues that we might kind of occur? And it starts to become part of not just the review process, but also from a diagnostic perspective. You can start to understand and see pain points before they actually happen. And one of the other things is that a design system allows you to design faster and get more done in much shorter periods of time. So it really does speed up the process where to take an idea into something that's sketched out and planned a lot quicker. And what this means is that you can start to really change the way you work. So one of the benefits that we've managed to do is adopt a more agile development process, one that actually focuses on like iterative development. So instead of a linear process where we start at the start of a course and end at the end, we actually adopted an approach where we work on a more focused way of building layers of fidelity. So we're actually thinking about the course as a whole right from the very beginning, and we might just be sketching it out in dot points. And then we add more layers of information as we go through. So it's a different way of working, but we've found it to be really effective. So what does a design system look like? Well, basically it's made out of these three components. So the first is these principles, and these are essentially the motivations and drivers for your project. So these are going to be really unique to your circumstances. What are you trying to do? But these things really do drive the project and part of the decision making that goes on. The second is that idea about language. So these are not just the words, but these can also be visual language that you use across your project. And so these are things that you can start to kind of talk about and you make these definitions. And that becomes a really kind of key component. And then the third is those components. These are the more elemental parts of the system, the patterns and styles and things that you're going to reuse throughout the project. So rather than talk about that in a fairly abstract way, what I thought I'd do is actually go through and share what it is that we actually did at the University of Adelaide. So starting off with these principles. A lot of course development tends to focus on the resources. And I guess, in an OER conference, a lot of time and effort goes into developing those resources, but also, the delivery and the teaching and the technology and the tools. And that tends to be where we focus a lot of our effort. But the reality was that we were a team of learning designers. So it's not really surprising that we actually wanted to focus and shift perspective onto learning. So we started our learning journey by actually starting to define what we wanted the learning experience to look like. What is it that we wanted students to experience at the other end of our courses? So we developed the Adelaide online learning experience. And this really helped to frame the way that we wanted to think about courses that we were developing, the kinds of experiences we wanted to, and the things that we wanted to make sure that were coming through the courses as we developed them. And this really did help shape our ways of working. So just briefly, we wanted to make sure that our courses were really clear. So, students could jump in there, they know where they need to go, they know what they need to do. Instructions were really clear and well laid out. We wanted to make sure that the experience was contextual. So, it was part of their profession that they were working towards. There was a lot of authentic assessments and tasks that they do. We wanted to make sure it was interactive. So even though we were making asynchronous online courses, we wanted to make sure that there was opportunities for students to not just consume content, but do things, making sure that there was a good balance of activities going on. We wanted to make sure that it was really challenging. Good learning is really pushing students outside of their comfort zone. So we wanted to make sure that part of what we were doing was really pushing students a little bit further, making them get outside of that comfort zone, but also making sure that we're supporting them go through that as well. And then the final one was around personalized. And this wasn't necessarily about trying to tailor everything to individual students, but more about actually allowing them to personalize their experience, to bring in their knowledge, their experience into the course and channel it through. So this meant sometimes, making sure that the assignments they could do in a different ways, that they could talk about their experience into things. And that was really about making things about them as a person, not necessarily kind of customizing their learning experience in general. But the reality is what we found was that these principles really help to drive those decisions. So if something really didn't align to those principles, then it didn't happen. We were able to actually stop doing things because they didn't align to those principles and focus our efforts on the things that would allow us to live those out. So the second one component of this was around language. So part of what we were trying to do was actually start to define what it is that learning actually meant. And part of that was to make sure that as a team, we were talking about it in the same way. And what we tend to do in the open education space is related to learning. We're talking about OERs and those resources, but often that's not happening directly. We help create and build these resources. We might create assessments of learning, the instructions and activities that promote learning. But at the end of the day, learning isn't our domain. It's on the individuals. It's the students that do the learning themselves. So what we were trying to work out is, well, then how do we design for that to occur? And when it comes to that individualized approach, it was really difficult to try and think about it. And it wasn't really until I was introduced to this idea of schema theory, this concept where our brains function as maps of connections. And in that sense, as individuals, we all develop our own schema and we link information to our perceptions, our physicality, our locations, relationships, sights and smells and sounds. And that's why, we can smell something or taste something and get a whiff and be drawn back into a memory or connected to an idea or an experience that we had. And so when we think about schema theory, then it's really interesting to start to think, well, what is learning then? Well, learning is really about connecting those concepts, those skills, and making that connection to our existing schema. So in order for us to learn, we have to form a connection. So learning then is about how do we go about forming those connections. So we did do a bit of a dive into the literature, and we really enjoyed the work that Diana Laurillard had done, where she introduced the concept of learning types in her conversational framework. The way that was framed was that it was about the dialogic relationship between teachers and students. But as a team that was working on asynchronous online courses, there wasn't a lot of dialogue happening. And so we wanted to adapt those learning types to circumstances that kind of matched what we were doing and perhaps make them a little bit more generic and expansive in terms of what did they actually capture. So this is the 7 learning types that we've developed. And they describe how we form connections in our schema. Finding out the one that works specifically for a student or a topic is a challenge. But what we were able to do is actually give names to the types so that we can actually talk to our course developers, our academics, and start to actually discuss learning and find commonalities in our approach. So the 7 types were assimilative learning, where we learn through content. A lot of this is around that OERs, those like textbooks and videos and information that we get exposed to. But we also learn by going out and finding that information, seeking things, doing research, that investigative type of learning. There's formative learning, where we learn by trying. Discursive learning, where we actually engage with other perspectives. Seeing different ways of doing things or thinking about things is really important, and having that discussion and bringing those things out. There's productive learning, where we actually learn by making things, and it's that practical sense of being able to do something with those ideas. There's evaluative learning, where we learn through feedback, and social learning, where we actually learn with others. And part of that is about sharing, being able to kind of see and share experiences, and how people think about some of these concepts. So The next step for us was then pairing those types with certain activities. And this became the shared language because what we were trying to do was specify for the academics we were working about was this was what you would need to do then. These are the kinds of things that you need to create in order for these different types of learning. And sometimes it was, I've got this idea about the activity, and then this is the type of learning. But what we were able to do is start to make what was really hidden and guesswork in some ways, actually start to see what was going on. So an example of like a lesson might be something like this, where you introduce a new concept, and that might be via a video, but that's essentially that assimilative learning. Then you might want to get students to actually go and find an example of that concept. That's that investigative learning. They might want to then share it back with the class. So there's a social element to that. Then you might have a go at making something, making a meme of that concept. So how do you kind of like visualize it? So there's a productive element. And then you share and you comment on each other's work in the classroom. And that's that evaluative bit where you're learning from not necessarily or not only getting feedback, but also giving feedback. And you can kind of see that these ways of learning can be done in a variety of different ways. It's kind of framed a little bit there to be done in an online, so you can kind of see this in an LMS, structuring that out on the page. But very easily, you could transfer this to being in the classroom. The idea with the learning types wasn't to be very specific on the, just for online. This was really about learning in a much more broader perspective. So what we noticed almost immediately was that a good learning experience doesn't consist of a singular type of learning, but it's constructed by combining them and moving through them as a sequence or a lesson. So a well-constructed lesson provides multiple connection points and opportunities to connect what's going on with the student's prior knowledge or experience. And because everyone's scheme is unique, the more diversity in that lesson, the greater chance you've got of creating those connections. So this is where those two ideas of the schemas and the learning type starts to go. And you can kind of see, I've tried to visualize it, but different memories, different ideas and their schema map that they've developed themselves is going to connect with different things. It might be going out and finding something is the thing that then connects. Or it might be that by having the discussion and hearing someone else's perspective on something, that aligns to the way that you were thinking about it as well. So really what we started to do was start to embed these learning types into our work. And we use this not just from a language perspective, but also the color palette as well as a visual language with all these things. So you can kind of see the colors that we've used here. Well, that became a cohesive visual language we employed. So this is an example of our early planning stages. So you can kind of see that along the bottom, we've got our 12 weeks of the course. And essentially then we've got how many hours of study and work are students doing in the course, and then actually mapping out, well, what are all the activities that they're going to be doing within that time frame? And you can start to see that the colors are there. You can see there's a lot of time spent on the assessments in this course. That's all the yellow. You can start to see that there's a lot of blue in there each week. There's a couple of hours of content that we're getting students to do. Now, that might not necessarily be content that you have to write, but it could be, making sure that you're finding the readings, finding the resources for students to work through. But very quickly, you can start to get a sense of what's there, but also what's missing in the course, what's not there. So very quickly, we could see, what colors aren't there, and start to ask questions and start to change the learning that we were going to be developing. One of the benefits that we had was we had a team that had some programming experience. And so we struggled a long time with the tools that we had access to in terms of that development and writing things. So we actually worked with them to actually develop our own tool. And this really helped us not only to just author, but to manage and measure our entire development process. So I'm not going to go into the tool itself, but just to give you an idea of this is what was possible. And as I said before, once you've got components, you can start to see things, you can count them. And that's essentially what's going on here. You've got the whole module, which is kind of like that might be the whole week of learning, and then you've got the lessons. But you can kind of see that we've got the actual learning experience. What is it the students are doing? What are the activities? What are the types of learning? And it's broken down into how many hours or how much percentage of their time is actually getting done. And that's across the whole week, but then also down into every single lesson within that week. What are those activities looking like? And from this, we could really start to diagnose like what's missing from the course. Start to push a little bit to go, well, hang on, we don't have these kinds of activities. And again, the next bit up is you can look at this from a whole course perspective. So not just seeing it from week to week, but as a whole course, what does this look like? So this course looks like there's a lot of content to get through. There's a lot of assessments. Now we work in higher education, so that tends to be how a lot of courses are focused, but we can also see where are the areas that we might want to improve. We can see here that students are doing a lot of assessments, but they're not doing a lot of evaluative. They're not getting a lot of feedback because that's only sitting at like an hour or 1% of the course is spent on feedback and evaluative learning. So we can identify things that we might want to change in that profile. Again, looking at the discussion component, maybe we want to add some more discussion so that it's a bit broader as to what's going on. So these things became really important for us to understand what was going on, because a lot of the time this was just hidden behind things. And this was the power, I guess, of setting that language up. And not just the words, but those visuals became a really powerful tool to see what we were talking about. So the next part was around the reusable components and how they actually go about speeding up that process. So the idea of a pattern language comes from Christopher Alexander, who was an architect who wanted to empower his clients to define a space's features and functions. And he realized that there were common like architectural patterns. It might be that you've got windows on two walls, and that means that you can get more light in. So he developed a whole series of patterns to solve those kind of issues. But then essentially the idea was that abstracting it a little bit so that he could talk with his clients and actually start to get a better idea by giving them the language to describe what they wanted, rather than just rely on the architect to actually interpret those things. So this was this idea of a pattern language, descriptive design elements that can be used and reused across context. And then what we were trying to do was not just across context, but outside of technologies and modes and modalities of study. So the standard way that a lot of courses get developed is through templates. And these are a bit of like a bugbear for me, but essentially what they try and do is they push everything into, mush it all up together and squeeze it into so it all looks the same shape. And the reality is when we're talking about the student experience, that becomes one of repetition, of sameness and conformity. Now, I agree that templates for looks and consistency are great, but not necessarily about the experience of learning. And so what we wanted to try and do was think about a different way of approaching that. So this was what we came up with, was a library of common patterns, and we related each one of these patterns to the types of learning, the kinds of activities as well. And the idea behind this was that these could become Lego pieces that help you to create a course. They provide some prompts, both for the learning designer and for a course developer or academic, whoever needs to or wants to work with this. And that helps to shortcut some of that design process. So on the website, you can go through and they're all grouped according to the learning types or activities. And then they contain a little bit of information about what do you need to do. And the way that we use this was similar to kind of Lego blocks, that you wanted to create a lesson. That's cool. Let's just talk through about what are the little pieces of this that you want to build that from. And this really allowed us to create quite rapid prototypes and construct lessons really quickly based on the information around the topic and the kinds of learning that would suit what we wanted the students to learn and experience. So combining the types and the patterns is pretty easy. You can use one or the other. You might think, oh, I want to have some assimilative learning. That's great. Now you can open the patterns and see, well, what types of assimilative learning? What are the kind of patterns there? So you can start to see on that diagram, we start with an orientation, and then we might want to pose a question that students go and find an answer to. So that's engaging in that investigative bit. There might be a definition. You might provide an example. So this was a really nice way of almost providing a shortcut for academics to start to think about things, that they're not just facing a kind of blank page when they're trying to develop up a course, but there is a way to do this. And these can start really as just outlines. And this is where that iterative approach comes along as well, that as when you first do this, it might be just picking the patterns, putting it in there, and then creating a couple of dot points for each one of those items. Then once you've got that in, you've got a skeleton now of the lesson. You can come back and add the details. You can write up the content. You can work out what the questions are. All of those things can happen. And so the whole course was being able to be developed in this more iterative way. We weren't getting stuck, or if we did get stuck, this could be a way to help us through it. And again, what we were able to do is start to look for, well, what's not in this lesson? What are the things that are missing? And again, focus on that diversity. We want to make sure that we're creating this really large surface area for students to connect to. So when a concept's being introduced, we want to make sure that there's a whole bunch of different ways that students can connect to that, not just read it or watch it. They might not be getting it there. Their schema might not have formed around that idea. It might be the way someone else uses an analogy, that they describe things, that comes through a discussion, or it comes through sharing their ideas. These are the kinds of things that we wanted to be able to do. And we wanted to make sure that using the patterns would work, whether it was in a classroom or online, that you could tailor this to whatever work that you were doing. So where are we now? Well, essentially, that was a 3-year program of study that we were developing. So, at the end of the project, we emerged with a pretty efficient way of operating. It took, almost the full 3 years to work out how to do all this stuff and iron out all the issues with it. But what we ended up with was a really collaborative way of working. Rather than this kind of transaction of you do this bit, I do this bit, we could actually sit in the room together and co-work on more of these elements. It was scalable because we used it for about 38 courses, I think we developed over that time, 2 full degrees. And also part of this was that it was data supported. We could actually show people what did the learning experience look like. And again, that idea of being iterative and adaptable was really useful in terms of managing the project, managing risks, people going on leave. All of those things was a much better way of doing it rather than that really linear kind of process. We did the normal things where we built all the things. So we built 36 courses. We worked with over 50 academics to develop all of those, with 600 and something videos, all of those things, like the normal things that you would expect to see in a course development process, they all still happened. We weren't kind of missing out on any of those things. And there's some really good videos, which I'll share the links through into the chat. And they'll be on screen as well in a little bit. But there's some really nice videos that we've kind of worked with our media team to try and capture some of the work that we did. So one was around, just looking at that project in general, talking about this course development process, what happened. And the best thing was actually this year, we had our first graduate. And Owen was willing for us to sit down with him and do an interview. And so we got some really good validation around our work, good feedback on what we'd been doing. And so that was, amazing. And this, we'd basically been developing all of these courses for him originally. He was our first student going through the whole program. And so that was fantastic. But in terms of the open component, the learning types and the learning patterns are out there. So I spent some time last year pulling all those bits and pieces together to put them up as resources. There's no logins or any of that. You can just go in there, you can use it. And I've been trying to share this as much as I can. And so part of the reason for taking the opportunity to talk here was to share this and put it out there. There's been some really interesting examples of people using it. It's been, I didn't even think about, but people who've used Google Translate and just here it is now in Spanish. I've used fairly simple language for a lot of it, so it does tend to translate, but always dependent on the tools that are out there. But I think that's one of the beauties of the work that we've done. So what's been happening at our work is that the University of Adelaide and the University of South Australia are actually merging together at the moment. So we're going to be one of the biggest universities in Australia at the end of that. but it kind of like sidetracked us away from the work that we had been doing to really focus on that merger and getting the new university set up. So we haven't necessarily taken it, above and beyond and implemented it across the entire university because we kind of got sidetracked and put onto other work, which was to do with that. But in terms of where to next, the point of this is that you can use this for your systems and start to develop and think about these things in your context. So I think the way to do this would be to really think about defining, well, what are your principles? What are you trying to do with the projects that you're using? But then there's a cheat code. You can take a shortcut and you could use those learning types as the foundation of the language. You don't necessarily have to use them as they are. You might want your own colors and all those kinds of things. But that way of working and thinking about things can be really empowering, not just for the learning designers, but for academics, people trying to teach. It's a resource and a way of thinking that really can be beneficial to a lot of people. And then at the same time, the patterns are also there. And in the spirit of OER, like they're there and they're open. So the point of it is to make sure that they're available to be adopted, to be adapted, and for you to extend them. Everything kind of lives on GitHub as well. So if you want some technicals, but if you've got suggestions on things that are missing, these were never designed to be just complete, particularly the pattern library. It gave us enough as a starting point, but we want to make sure that this is a thing that we can contribute to in an ongoing way. And to be honest, this was definitely something that sat within our work, but I really would love to expand who can access this into the future. So that's how, if you want to chat to me, you don't have to do it all here, but any point in time, if anyone wants to email me, if you're on Mastodon, you can do that. But you can also check out those websites, learningtypes.com and learning-patterns.com. And those videos are up there to peruse as well. But I feel like I've talked a lot and I tried to get through a lot. So I'm going to stop. I'll stop the recording as well. But yeah, it was great to have this opportunity to share the work.